Welcome to Gold Derby. I'm senior editor Denton Davidson here with Laura McGann, director of The Deepest Breath, a heart-pounding documentary about a champion freediver and a safety expert who seemed destined to find each other in this life-threatening extreme sport. Laura, I was not that aware of freediving and how competitive this was. You reveal so much that was all new to me. How did you become aware of Alessia and this world record freediver and Steven, without giving too much away, because there are twists and turns that shocked me at the end. So I don't want to spoil it for everyone.
Well, I didn't know anything about it either until quite recently when we started to make this film. I suppose I read about Stephen and Alessia in 2017, and I didn't know anything about freediving. So I did have to Google what is freediving. And I spent the afternoon just in this rabbit hole of watching videos of people holding their breath underwater for what felt like half the day without the urge to breathe. I just thought, I was immediately thought like, this would look incredible on the big screen. Like, how do we get this into the cinema, and how do we make a film about this? And then getting to know more about what happened with Stephen and Alessia, and learning about the world, the connection between the people involved and the sea, and this incredible meditative sport that is also quite dangerous and also massively competitive. And there's this whole world going on that we knew nothing about, and is fascinating, and is dramatic, and is full of heart and soul and a lot of love. So it was one of those things where you kind of pull at a thread, and this magical line just appeared, and this beautiful story. So that's kind of how it started.
As you began researching this and interviewing people, were you able to understand why they do this? Because from an outsider like myself, it's insanity. Like these people black out and need to be resuscitated like it's an everyday occurrence. You can damage your lungs if you don't die and be on oxygen at the age of 40. I mean, did you get a sense of where that comes from, where that adventure comes from, and that desire to risk their lives every day?
Well, first of all, to say, you know, people, freedivers, I don't think they feel like they're risking their lives every day. Maybe we're risking our lives every day by crossing the road, but like that aside, there's a real high involved. There's a beautiful meditative falling. In the film they talk about free fall, which is when you get down to 30 meters, the pressure above you pushes you down, and it's just like you're falling to the bottom of the sea. It's kind of like flying. So there's different, also, like there's the whole mental side of it where you put your head in the water, and all of the shit from daily life, all the niggly things, all that busyness in your head just disappears, and it's quiet, and like that is appealing. So there's a list as long as my arm that could tell you, why they do it. And we go into it in the film, but really it's just something soulful. It's something in that's just in these people in the film, and it's their home, and the sea is Alessia's home, and it always has been.
We see this incredible footage of Alessia and Stephen in their own lives. And how difficult was it to go through that footage? How did you obtain the footage, first of all? And then how do you decide through all of these hours of footage how to insert it into the film to properly tell the narrative that you're looking for?
Well, I wanted from the very start, I knew that I wanted to tell the story. I wanted it to be in the moment. Didn't want it to be kind of like retrospectively looking back. I wanted the people to be telling the story in the moment, and I wanted to see as much of it happen on the screen in the frame as possible. So we went about it in a funny way where we spoke to everybody. We figured out what the story was. Because this wasn't like an article that was written that we went and made the film. Like, it was very much finding the story, and finding how Alessia and Stephen's stories kind of like spoke to one another even before they met, as they're going towards the meeting point. And I suppose so that's how we figured out the story first, and then we said, right, is there any archive out there? to cover this amazing moment and this amazing moment. So it was very much a scene-based approach as well. So for example, when Stephen saves Alexei Molchanov, we said, look, this is an incredible story. Was there anybody there with a camera? And someone was like, oh, I'm sure there was a camera. And like that again, you know, who's the organizer, right? It was Stavros, right? Does anybody know? And this is like footage that's 15 years old. God, does Stavros still have the hard drive? And it was like it was kind of incredible how every route that we went down looking for footage, it existed. And another treasure trove of it existed. And getting to sit and watch the material then after you've heard this story so many times, you've imagined it in your head, and then you get to press play on the real thing. It was really amazing, really, really amazing. And for every scene, we have the material from the day. And then there was sometimes when we'd be missing a particular shot, say like in that Stavros footage where Stephen is rescuing Alexei Molchanov, but he's waiting there because he hasn't come up yet. He's waiting for at 30 meters for like a minute. And there wasn't a shot of anybody. There wasn't a shot of Stephen because nobody films the safety divers. They don't bother. They're all waiting for the main event to arrive. And so that was, we did a little bits of recon where we got a big wide shot of a diver in the middle of the frame. And so we peppered recon in amongst the archive where there wasn't coverage. And this really helped to kind of to have as much of the action on screen in the frame and watch it happen. For the audience, it felt like the right approach.
And you spoke to both Alessi's and Stephen's fathers. It's difficult to watch them talk about their kids who risk their lives, and they're sort of at times watching them dive on video and sort of living through, like hoping their child comes up for the next breath. What was it like talking to the parents of these two?
Well, like it struck me really early on talking about this story. It was like, what's it like for the families? Like to watch them, exactly what you were saying there, like to watch their kid doing that. And I was like, we need to talk to them about this because this is massive for them. And, you know, it could, you know, they go through this massive kind of emotional journey every time they're, you know, Alessia disappears into the darkness of the sea and he has to wait there for a couple of very long minutes. And I just wanted to know, as a human being, I wanted to know, how do you do that over and over again and continue to be a sane person? And how, you know, and the same with Peter, you know, Peter lived for years not knowing, kind of waiting for a phone call. And it's that waiting for a phone call. I was like, how do you, you know, it just really intrigued me. A lot of the things that I do, like in this film and in different films, it's like stuff that I want to know. I want, you know, I feel like the film is an excuse to go and figure out, go into these incredible worlds and figure out how it all works. But one of the things that Peter said was that a really simple thing is that you just learn to live with it.
Wow.
It was like, right.
What I also found interesting is that the safety divers are at just as much risk. I don't necessarily know that I understand why in that sport they're not like in scuba gear. Is that just not in their mentality? They're like, no, we don't do that.
No, that's not the case. So what happens is if you're in scuba gear, you have to come up slowly to decompress.
Okay.
Otherwise you'll get the bends and you'll hurt yourself. So the reason why the safety divers have to be free divers is that if their diver needs to be brought up ASAP, they need somebody who can bring them up as quick as possible. So they need to be holding their breath. So.
Okay. Can you talk about the cinematography and Tim Craig's work? Because this is not only a thrill ride with archival footage, but there's such beautiful moments of the ocean and the landscape. Talk about his work and what he was able to contribute to this film.
So yeah, me and Tim started to work together really early on this, and first of all, we approached the interviews in a way where we wanted it to feel like everyone was kind of like maybe they'd just gotten out of the sea or the pool, but the sea was just there or the pool was just there, so that it felt like it was in the same world as as the world that they were in the archive, that in the scene that we were in. So we chose some pretty challenging locations for that just kind of had, tons of noise and light changing and all that. And Tim just dealt with it really well. We also worked with Julie Gauthier, and she did a lot of our underwater stuff. And so Tim and Julie kind of came to this, and myself as well. We wanted the underwater and the ocean material to reflect the archive as well, so that it didn't feel like, oh, you're suddenly coming out into this real glossy look, whereas everything else was like really handheld and very much like, amateurly shot. So we filmed in Dahab, in the Blue Hole, both above the surface and under, and then we filmed in Mexico in a cenote out in the sea. And Julie is a free diving cinematographer, so she's holding her breath and she's shooting, and she's free diving for the same reason that the safety divers are free diving, so that she can go up and down with the divers. So we were out in the middle of the sea on a boat, and I had like figurines, a safety, like a scuba diving figurine, a free diving cinematographer figurine, and the other free divers. We'd have to explain what everyone's doing at 30 meters under the water. So we'd all get into the sea, they'd go down, get the shot, everybody free diving, come back up, show me the shot. I'd say, that's brilliant, can you just do it slightly different? And they'd go down again to 30 meters, get the shot, and come back up. It was like having a fleet of dolphins on our team. Like, it was filmmaking like I had never imagined could really exist. So like, as a filmmaker, to have that incredible wealth of archive and beautiful archive to work with, but then also to be able to shoot this underwater film, and then bring it all together, was a really special experience, like one that I'll never forget.
It's such a beautiful, captivating film. Congratulations. You've received 4 Critics' Choice Documentary Awards, including Best Feature. So good luck there. Anyone who hasn't seen the film yet, it's streaming on Netflix. I highly encourage everyone to do so. And Laura, thank you for joining Gold Derby today.
Thanks a million. Lovely chatting to you.
Welcome to Gold Derby. I'm senior editor Denton Davidson, here with Dee Smith, director of the bold, brave, and unfiltered documentary Kokomo City, which spotlights Black transgender sex workers in Atlanta and New York City. Dee, I was not surprised at some of the darker moments of the film, but what did surprise me was how funny and entertaining this is throughout. You did such a great job of showing these women's personality and humor along with their struggles. Talk about the tone of the film and what you wanted to present to the world.
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. I think what was one of the most important things to accomplish in this film was to kind of get the girls comfortable in the most genuine way, and to also to earn their trust. Even as a trans woman, that doesn't mean that they're automatically going to just open up. A lot of these women have trust issues, abandonment issues. I mean, like real issues that are still ongoing. So I was very respectful in terms of just how I approached them, but I was also very confident in what I wanted to achieve. And I think they were really struck by that approach. And because so many times in being trans women, especially Black women, we are kind of like attached to these boundaries and these fortresses that kind of like have been built to protect us, but they also in return have caused a lot of harm to the narrative in terms of just creating these language barriers. And I thought they were totally up for the challenge, and it was very encouraging and inspiring for them to be a part of this.
How did you decide on who you were going to speak to, and how did you make them so comfortable? The film primarily focuses on Daniela Carter, Coco Dedal, Leah Mitchell, and Dominique Silver. So where did you find these 4, and what led you to gain their trust in that way?
Sure. Well, I found these women on social media, Instagram. I went to like the popular celebrity, if you will, trans women, and just kind of like sifted through their comments. And I don't know, I wasn't looking for anything particular. I was just strolling, and whatever caught my eye was kind of like the page I went to. And there were quite a few pages that I went to. I wasn't looking for anything snarky or, kind of cliche or over the top. I just wanted something that was relatable, felt balanced emotionally. And like Leah, for example, she had a YouTube channel like a few years ago. I saw her and I was just stuck. She didn't have a lot of followers at all, but there was something so magnificently genuine about her, right? She's just on YouTube making her videos very, very raw, if you could imagine. I saw something in that the world really needed to see. I couldn't relate to the stories that she was telling, but I felt like I was there when she told them, and it was just a no-brainer, so I found them that way. But again, when I approached the girls, I was very transparent about, I didn't go into depth about me being homeless or not having any money, but I was like, hey, listen, my approach to this is not going to be your quintessential, queer, transgender narrative where we're just like interviewing in front of a brick wall, like, ironically. But I wanted something that felt, just real, untampered with, and it's scary to them. I wanted them to feel uncomfortable, in terms of like, not having glam, not having a wig, not having a stylist come in, not having fancy lights. These are things that people just attach us to, as trans women. We have to be dolled up. And I told them we're not going to do that. And we're also not going to use any of the red carpet narratives. I want you to talk, be yourselves. I don't care what it is you want to do. Whatever you do around your house, I'm going to encourage that we do that. So that was really exciting for them. I mean, to have an opportunity to speak your mind with no politics or rules involved, So I was excited. And I think that excitement and that genuine trust and that urgency, I think they really picked up on it very quickly, because I was extremely serious about doing this film.
We'll talk about the way you filmed it, because it's in black and white. It's beautifully shot. It's almost you're almost sort of beneath them. We're kind of almost looking up at them at a slight angle. What was your decision in that filmmaking process? Because you have gotten a lot of credit for the cinematography. That's one of the things you're nominated for at the Critics' Choice Documentary Awards, is the cinematography. So talk about your decision to shoot the film in that way.
Well, I wanted to empower them. And it kind of just went hand in hand with the black and white. It was like a few things happening, right? I wanted to do all the things that were never done with trans women, or not enough where we could remember, far most, to be very candid with you, when I first started Kokomo City, I simply wanted to make an art film. I wanted to just make something artsy, and it became very serious, very, very fast. And shooting in black and white was the magic for me to do this film. Black and white, it's so timeless, it's so powerful, and it's such a strong medium and a technique. Like, you could take the most grittiest element for walking around New York City and slap black and white on it, and it becomes art. It becomes elevated, and it becomes dignified. And I wanted the girls, and I wanted trans people and the world to see these women being elevated, which led me to kind of do a lot of kind of worm's eye view angles, because they were empowered. This was their moment. And I was, in a sense, beneath them, because they're telling me their stories. And I wanted to be respectful, and I wanted people watching them to feel like this is special, to even have this opportunity to have these women to open up in such a way. You're privileged to have to see this. And as I was, there was so much that I didn't know, but I wanted to make it visually aesthetically stimulating or pleasing. So that was my number one choice.
Well, you not only direct the film, you edit it, you shot it, you compose the music, you have control over everything. You've been very upfront about your struggles. I mean, you're a Grammy nominated music producer, and then your life got flipped on its head. So
Yeah.
you're struggling, you make a decision, I'm going to make a film. So you do all of these things. Was that because you like to have that much control, or was this the position you were forced to be in to make the film that you wanted to make, and you just found yourself that you excel in all of these areas?
Damn, that was good. That was really good because honestly, like I was breaking this down with my best friend. I said, I've always been this way. Even as a child, I don't know if it's me being controlling or just protective. Because when you have an idea and you kind of compromise your idea for other people to freaking get it, it sucks. It doesn't come out the same. And I thought it's worth doing all the work. It was so, I want to say fun, but it was so fulfilling to me. I was instinctively drawn to do what I did in the film. Number one, I didn't have the money to hire anyone. But even if you have money, it's finding the right people to really understand when it's something that is not cliche or easy to follow. It's just people really freak out by new, or unsafe. They do. And, I reached out to multiple filmmakers and told them about Kokomo City, and they all rejected the film. So that was another reason why I had to do everything. And instead of me being discouraged, I was pissed. I was hyped, and I got so empowered and I got the audacity to honor the gifts that I have. And every time I looked around, I was pretty good at something. I spent most of my life pursuing and chasing music. I love music. But the music industry really did a number on me. So I went back to square one, homeless, feeling like I need to prove myself, nothing to lose. I mean, nothing to lose. I love my life. I've never thought of committing suicide, but this was that time where I was like, I was going through it. So for me to have the opportunity to really express myself creatively, there was no turning back.
Well, it was a hell of a pivot. And before I end this, I just have to commend you and talk about that final shot in the film. Dominique Silver. That's one of the most powerful endings. It's like, here I am. Talk about your decision to shoot that and what her decision to go along with that was.
Well, again, I wanted to do things that were not very popular. Telling trans women's story, again, that fortress, people are trying to help. There are organizations that are trying to help, but they're also doing a lot of damage to our community as Black people, where it feels like there's like becoming even more divided between trans women and the Black community. So, these was just one of those things I just wanted to slap on this film with no regret. And look, at the end of the day, trans women want to be humanized, as everyone wants to be humanized, but there's still this thing where, well, okay, we're going to make them human, but we're not going to go all the way. We're going to add, they can sit at our table, but they can't, they can't do this, they can't do that. That's the experience of being transgender. Me personally, I am not looking for extra privilege. I'm just looking for the what everyone else has. I would fight for my personal beliefs and my things like that, but at least respect me as a human. So as a human, you have women that do what happened at the end. You have men that do what happens at the end, and you don't get that with trans women. And I think that this was perfect. And so for me to bring it to Dominique, the idea, it was the only time really in the entire film where I got pushback. And Dominique, respectfully, is a really, really successful adult entertainment actor, right? And she's a huge porn star, huge following, right? And the girl looks good too. But she was so uncomfortable with the idea of a trans woman in the safety of her home, filming her in her pure transgenderism. She was threatened by that and uncomfortable. And the moment I saw her being defensive, that's when I got really inspired. I didn't push it, but I sold it. And I had to tell her, this is exactly why you should do it. Because when you're shooting, adult content, you have this safety net with the actor or a guy or something. And that validates your womanhood. That validates your transgenderism. But you looking into the mirror with who you are should do that. And I said, imagine all the girls that just need to see that.
Well,
And
congratulations.
And that was it.
Congratulations on this documentary. It's really beautiful and eye-opening, and good luck with everything this awards.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to Gold Derby. I'm senior editor Denton Davidson here with Lisa Cortes, director of Little Richard, I Am Everything. This is a legacy piece that explores his music, his roots, his queerness, his religion. It's really all-encompassing. There are many celebrities and icons worthy of a documentary like this, but why Little Richard for you, and why now?
Little Richard's music obviously is infectious, but his story is so intriguing. There's many facets of his contribution to the foundation of rock and roll that people don't know. I think we all hold this image of this person who was a caricature, who was telling people to shut up. And we didn't understand what was underlying there, his pain for a lack of recognition. But also it's a film that is talking about erasure. It's talking about erasure at a time where many parts of our country, there are movements to not tell the totality of queer history and also of Black history. And so Little Richard's passing in the spring of 2020 really became a beacon to explore not only what made him such an incredible icon, but also the cultural landscape that he existed in, and in many ways was such a tremendous force for change.
There were so many things that surprised me to learn about him through this film. What surprised you the most?
Well, Little Richard's life is quite a roller coaster. There's numerous surprises, but what was interesting was the discovery of his time as Princess Livone. So after this kid who's born in Macon, Georgia, is kicked out of his home in his teens for being queer, he not only is taken in by a queer bar in Macon, Anne's TikTok, okay, right there. It's like, this does not make sense in the 1940s with what we have been told is a history. And then the next part is Princess Livone, the character that Little Richard takes on when he performs in drag, and how that part of his story intersects with a greater drag history and speaks to this idea that Americans are not as conservative as many people would like to tell us we are. There have always been spaces for Little Richard, for Sister Rosetta Tharpe, for queer people to contribute and to be a part of the rich cultural texture of our country.
There's so much footage of him throughout his career and so many interviews he did. He was basically able to narrate this film, which I loved. How did you sort through so many decades of footage to decide what you wanted to use for the film? What's that process entail?
When I started working on this film and did my research, what was very apparent to me was it was necessary to give little Richard the agency to tell his story. And that was, I think, a constant theme in his life of not being given his complete voice in his totality. Yes, we heard his musical voice. And so at the beginning of the project, I asked the archival producers to do a really huge sweep to make certain that we could identify Richard as a narrator for his cradle to grave story. And was really lucky to work with Rich Remsburg and Ginnity and Kennedy, who helped with that task. And then our editors came on board, Nenev Minier, Jay Kostatter, and they started working with me to pull those moments that we thought really were Richard as narrator, but with great emotionality and a sense of he's not just telling the story, he's giving you great stories about not only his relationships, but also his craft.
There was this constant push and pull with Richard in his life. He went from rock star to Christian, from drug addict to saved, from gay to converted and married. Did you get the sense he ever really got what he was seeking in life, or was able to come to terms with that? Because those were some of the most surprising things to me. I have this image of growing up and seeing him, and I don't remember like the gospel years, but he was singing those gospel songs, but that's not a Richard I remember.
Yeah, that Richard is one who is involved with the Adventist community, that if you're not in that community, you would not have seen and heard that material. I think that Richard was able to come to terms with everything through his relationship with God. I do not believe, though, that he was able to hold on to the totality of all that he contained. And that's part of the richness of the journey. It is not a linear story. It is one that is looking at Richard's impact on the greater world and pop culture, but it's also looking at the tumultuous interiority of his life. And it is a story that many people relate to, the sacred and the profane. How can they live together? And it is the churn in this story that affects his music performances, his relationships, and ultimately his giving up rock and roll. And I think that's what makes him so rich. And this is not just a jukebox musical.
He was incredibly overlooked as an artist, and his contributions to music for decades. In 1997, he got this American Music Award, the Award for Merit. And that was an emotional moment for him. He's on stage crying. This was really the first time that he's been recognized for inspiring all of these rock stars, essentially everyone that has come after him. What do you think? Do you think his flamboyant personality or the way he dressed was one of the reasons that he was overlooked in that way? Because we don't see Ray Charles joked about like that. We don't see Stevie Wonder talked about like that. Do you think society was not able to accept him in some ways? Is that part of what was oppressing the respect he was getting?
I think it's a combination of his voicing his outrage. You're not supposed to say you're unhappy with a system. And it's a system in his case that took tremendous advantage of him. He only got $250 for writing Tutti Frutti. He gave away all of his rights. And so much of the pushback, as his former manager said, he was outspoken, he was Black, and he was gay. And we know that that's not an approach that is welcomed in our culture. We're supposed to take what we get. And, I think we have to applaud Richard for continuously pulling out the receipts and calling people on it.
And one of the other things that intrigued me so much is he was not just Black during segregation and gay during segregation. What I loved about the film is that you interviewed people who were in his band and they were not gay, but they loved him. I mean, they followed him everywhere. Was that interesting to you to see people of that time and of that era that were so supportive? These are some stories that we don't hear of people that don't exist in a lot of our minds.
It didn't surprise me at all. I know the story from my aunties, my grandmother, about the queer man who worked at the beauty parlor, who they loved and was their best friend. And so in our community, there's the stories that we know about that haven't really been part of the popular narratives that have been presented. And Richard's generosity is a constant that I heard about from everyone that I interviewed. He might have been a larger than life, sometimes challenging figure, but he also cared and looked out for people who had less than him. And I think that, kindness always trumps any kind of barriers that people might have about someone who they think is different from them.
Mick Jagger, Billy Porter, John Waters, these are a few people you interview for this project. How do you decide who to choose? Who do you want commentary from on his career and his contribution to music and pop culture?
When I'm working on a project and doing my research, I'm always thinking of a couple of buckets: family and friends, in this case, musicians who worked with Richard, people who are part of the legacy, and my pundits. So with Mick Jagger, I just thought people have never really talked to him about the very special connection that the Stones had with Little Richard. As we know from the film, Mick tells us they were a bar band. They only had a cover tune out, and they opened for him 30 nights in a row. And he sat there transfixed by Richard's performance and learned so much over that 30 days, 30 nights, I should say. It's a part of Mick Jagger's DNA now. Billy Porter, it was fantastic to speak with because he is the legacy and he can live his life in a way that Richard never was able to. And I thought that was a really important part of the conversation. When I'm making films, I just don't want it to be in the past tense. I want the past to be in conversation with contemporary issues. And then, John Waters, not only is his mustache a tribute to Little Richard, but when I think of Hairspray, like Hairspray, both the musical, the movie, and the original, film by John Waters, is talking about this very important time with rock and roll, where rock and roll is bringing white and Black kids together. So even though you watch Hairspray and you're thinking, about John Travolta playing the mom, there's much deeper commentary contained in that film about this desire to keep white and Black kids apart and how the music was a very important bridge. So John Waters was there for so many reasons. And I don't know, Hairspray is also one of my favorite films.
Well, this is certainly a great film as well. Congratulations, Lisa, on your Critics' Choice Documentary Award nomination and this wonderful film about Little Richard. Thanks for discussing it with Gold Derby today.
Thank you.
Welcome to Gold Derby. I'm senior editor Denton Davidson here with Amanda McBaine, one of the directors of the documentary The Mission, which tells the story of 26-year-old John Chow, who was killed in an attempt to contact the Sentinelese, an indigenous group off the coast of India. Amanda, what led you to this story? How did you hear about this for the first time, and what made you want to dive into this and direct a film about it?
We read the news story, as did a lot of people. It became global news when John Chow was killed on the island, attempting to convert them. And I think usually Jesse, my co-director, and I kind of run the other direction when we read a big global news story, even as fascinating as it was. But I think there was something about this in the headlines that suggested there was more to it. And pretty quickly that the family released the diaries that John left behind as a way to counter the reductive narrative they felt had been presented in a lot of the news headlines and some of the memes that John became and the Sentinelese became. And I think those diaries suggest us a much deeper story. And that's really where this started. And at the same time, we were interested in the film, National Geographic was also pursuing the film. And I think that when they came to us, it became pretty clear that if National Geographic wants to do it because of their organic part of the story, because they had the magazine had done a story on the Sentinelese in the 70s, there's a real synergy to everything that was happening. So we thought, okay, maybe we don't know how we're going to do it. We have no idea how we're going to make this film, but there's something interesting in here, and we're going to start to investigate.
I think what the film does such a great job of is you have John and you have the Sentinelese. There's not really a hero and a villain. I mean, it feels well balanced in the way you feel about these characters at the end of it. How did you balance that without, wanting to hurt John's family by, a lot of people thought, what is he doing? You don't go to this island. It's forbidden. And then a lot of people might look down on this Sentinelese tribe for killing him. But they had, as we see in the film, certain history and reason to.
Yeah. I mean, partly because I think our reason for doing the film in the first place was for us, a question: what would propel John to go to this island? Why would you want to make contact with an uncontacted tribe? I had issues, I'd say, of consent. They don't want you to come. They do not want your message. And as a person who didn't grow up in the church, there's a lot of question marks for me on his actions. At the same time, we also very quickly received John's master plan and realized this is a 10-year journey for this, because it's not an impulsive act. This was a very prepared individual. And the sort of the paradox of John, frankly, is that he was rational. He loved life. He spent 10 years physically preparing and spiritually preparing, and had a family who cared about him, who were also Christian, who had a different understanding of the Great Commission and didn't agree with what he was preparing to do. And we also received a letter from the father, and there's just this sort of heartbreaking effort to understand when did he lose his son to this, what he calls a whirlpool of radical faith. And I think all of those questions, for me, again, as a secular person, were what I wanted to lean into. It's uncomfortable stuff, to be frank. I was very uncomfortable with the story from the get-go. And I thought, well, this far in my career, that's kind of the stuff I want to lean into, frankly, is why is this so uncomfortable? And why is this so fascinating? And also, how could there be a tribe out there that still has not been contacted in our very mapped world? And don't we want to protect that? Isn't that an amazing and beautiful thing? And I think what you say is balance is more like, I just want to listen because I really don't understand.
Yeah.
And so I think you'll see in our film, there's sort of a range of people bring in a lot, by the way, to this particular story of feelings about John and feelings about religion and feelings obviously about colonialism, and it sort of becomes a much bigger story than just this microcosm of this moment of John Chow being killed by the Sentinelese. And there was a real value to that too, is this story, just the aperture kept opening and opening and opening to at some point we were like, we have to contain this, even though there's a lot to say, we really have to stay sort of focused.
You weave animation into this film beautifully. We see John's father in his letter scene in animation, as well as John's journey to the island and sort of his planning. Things you have archival footage, but there's also things we don't have archival footage for that you use this animation for. Talk about implementing that in this film and that decision.
Sure. Well, Jesse and I have made a number of films, and most of them are verite films. So present tense, follow somebody as a story is unfolding, and then you have your material, and that's great. And then you go and you spend a long time trying to make sense of that in the edit room. This is again part of the fear and actually discomfort of starting this project, was how little we had. And of course, the moment of contact, we always knew was going to be obviously an important chapter to this story, and how are we going to represent that without, and we had this beautiful diary, the words of John through this part of the story, but we had no image. And I think, the idea of a live action reenactment or anything like that was definitely off the table. It's illegal and, in my view, immoral to go to this place and to recreate it in any other place. I mean, casting for the Sentinelese, and there's just all kinds of problems, right? Although there is a fiction film, by the way, being created of this by the guy who did the fast driving car movie, The Fast and the Furious. So a very different project from this, but all of that just felt wrong. And I think there was something natural to, John had grown up reading Christian comic books and taking in all kinds of sort of fantasy, hero's journey, kind of boy's own adventure type stories, and including Tintin. And so there was a natural, I think, feeling that animation could be part of the grammar of this movie. It terrified us because we've never done that before, and it's a very slow process. It's a very scripted process, but in the end, I felt it was the right one 100%, because it is so subjective. It's a representation of what Amanda and Jesse and the illustrators who we worked, or the animators who we worked with, using, again, the very few scraps of material we had, the diary and images of the Sentinelese and of John, to recreate this moment that is so clearly subjective, right? Sometimes with documentary, I think audiences occasionally, well, this is the objective truth, and that's never true on any film. So I love animation, and people have done it really well. And with Flea and Waltz with Bashir, I mean, just extraordinary films. And we thought, we'll try it. This sort of storybook quality of it and the emotionality of it was something we really needed in that moment. And so it was really fun, but really hard.
You talked to some interesting subjects in the film. Some of my favorites are, you talked to his best friend from college. That gave a lot of insight on where they were coming from religiously and sort of their religious awakening in college. Another person that you spoke to is someone who was a former missionary, and he used to go into areas that were indigenous and try to convert these people, and he saw the damage that could do. And it impacted him so badly that he not only went from being a missionary to just completely not believing in God at all, which is really a 180. So what led you to, where did you find him? I found him to be a very captivating source in the headspace of where John was.
I don't think we had a movie until we met Dan Everett, I'll be honest with you, because for me, he is someone I can relate to, I can talk to, I could talk to for days and hours. I mean, there are very few people who have his life story. If in fact, he may be the only one. So he was in the Amazon for 30 years with his children, with his babies and his,
Incredible.
and I believe his ex-wife is still there, so, and then he had this second act or third act, really. And so I could relate to him, but more importantly, he could relate to John in a way. So there was sort of a translation he could do for us. Jesse and I are, again, both secular. So that level of compassion, but also from the inside out judgment on John was critical to us kind of putting this film together. And though he did not go to the same island as John, as the other people in our film did. So the anthropologist Tien Pandit did go to North Sentinel Island. The adventurer historian Adam Goodhart, who is in our film, also went to that same island. Dan Everett went to the Amazon, but he did walk the walk in a way that very few missionaries do. There are a lot of missionaries out there, more than I ever knew. Evangelical missionaries in particular. America has exported many of these sort of soldiers out into the world, but few do this kind of dangerous level of full immersion in very far away places with tribes who've had very little interaction with civilized, not civilized, but like Western sort of worldview. And I think that is where Dan is spending most of his life now, is sort of trying to he has perspective on the actions of his earlier younger self in a way that was critical, I think, for this film, and a level of regret and a level of understanding how much he had centered his point of view in that moment in time, and now he tries to see the bigger picture and his small place in that bigger picture.
Well, Amanda, congratulations on this film, The Mission. It's nominated for 4 Critics' Choice Documentary Awards, and the accolades just keep piling on. So it's well deserved. And thanks for joining Gold Derby today.
Thanks, Den.
Welcome to Gold Derby Meet the Experts documentary film panel. Today I'm joined by Laura McGann, director of The Deepest Breath, Dee Smith, director of Kokomo City, Lisa Cortes, director of Little Richard, I Am Everything, and Amanda McBaine, director of The Mission. The accolades are piling on for these films. You all are incredible filmmakers. I want to ask sort of an icebreaker question. If you were teaching a film study course, what is one film that you would show your students and why? And I'm going to start with Laura.
Oh, thanks. Well, one film that I would show my students, one documentary or
It doesn't have to be.
Okay.
Whatever inspires you.
Okay, well, there's an amazing film called Touching the Void. Touching the Void, that is it's a few years old now, but it is it's one of the first kind of films where they merge, documentary and recon and archive in a really, really immersive way. And you're kind of in the moment, but you're also going through this story with the people telling you at a time where obviously it's already happened, but they're also going back there and doing the recon themselves. And that's what you see in the film. And it's an incredibly dramatic story with an arc that resembles a narrative. So that, I think, like, it would be really, sometimes with documentaries, we kind of, like, I think as a student, I certainly it took me a while to come around to the idea of what a documentary could look like in terms of a narrative arc, in terms of it having a beginning, middle, and end, and being a story. I love stories, and I love real life, and the best stories are from real life. And quite often, as a filmmaker starting out, it's hard to kind of marry those two things, and it's a really kind of, it's a real learning curve as well, in terms of like story structure and the basics and the elements of storytelling and applying them to documentary. I think I think it would be a good place to start.
Dee, how about you?
Yeah, I honestly, I'm gonna be honest, this is such a tough question for me. I watch different films for different reasons. I don't watch too much, but I don't know, for some reason I'm drawn to more of like moments in my childhood, like Color Purple. I know it's very timely for me to say that. But well, you know what? I probably would take that back. I will go with Crying Game.
Oh, that's a choice.
Yeah, it's not a documentary, but it was just one of those movies that lingers, and you don't know how to feel after. I like stuff like that. I mean, I love Devil Wear Prada, but I like movies that really haunts me, and it makes me want to just go back. It's like being attracted to something or someone that's toxic. It's like you're trying to figure this thing out. You're trying to make it right, but it's not meant to be right. It's like in Crying Game, there were so many really emotionally provoking moments. And might I add, it was so ahead of its time. I remember a moment where when he, got sick after she exposed that she was transgender and she was naked, and just that, even though I didn't identify as transgender then, I definitely knew I was. I just didn't know that, and that made me feel icky. It made me feel away. But now that I'm able to step back, the director was really trying to do what I did with Kokomo City, push the envelope, be real, but also at the same time, I don't know how real that reaction is in private. I don't know. I don't know. And so, see, even right now, I'm getting triggered. That's a movie I wouldn't mind remaking, to be honest with you. But there's so many things that just kind of like jolt you. Yeah.
Lisa, how about you?
It's a hard one. No one has, I think all of us have done a lot of roundtables and interviews, and no one's asked us that. So I'm going for today, because if you ask me tomorrow, I'm going to have a different answer. It would be Raoul Peck's "I Am Not Your Negro." I am such a James Baldwin fan, and what Raoul is incredibly successful in doing with that film is this tapestry of Baldwin's voice and history through time. The narration by Samuel Jackson I thought, is really great connective tissue. And this unpacking of seemingly heady, complicated ideas that he's able to unspool in a way that you understand why Baldwin went on the specific journey that he did, and his framing on what are the true issues that we need to be looking at if we are going to have any type of parity in our society for all members. And it's black and white, like Dee's film, which I just like that you took that chance, Dee. And it's so fitting for the Baldwin who I personally knew, in reflecting his voice and what was a constant in the struggles that he was highlighting and working for constructive change.
And Amanda.
I almost want to refuse to answer this question because there's so many, in a way, what I would want, I never went to film school, but what I would want from a documentary class is a presentation of the full breadth of what a documentary can be. And I think we have that a little bit here too. You have I have a very essayistic film, you have immersive verite, you have these incredible archival deep dive films. So I would I'm gonna cheat and just say that I would do probably a class that involves an amazing, there's a whole wealth of verite film, but the one that really got me into film was Brothers Keeper, which is a Joe Berlinger and Sanofsky film from a long time ago. Oh my gosh, was that his name? Anyway, it's true verite about these four brothers and just such an extraordinary character study. And then I would also show Active Killing as another example of something that has a little more meta in it. And then Leviathan, right? A completely immersive, just like almost anthropological thing. And then One Day in September, speaking of touching the void, just an extraordinary way to tell a past tense story using it as immersively as you possibly can. And I think immersion is really the key. Character and immersion, like those are the things that really motivate me in this business. So that's my non-answer answer.
Well, you mentioned you made 4 different style of films. They are very different films, but at the core of each of them is someone who did something very brave, someone who went against the grain, someone who went out against what a large part of society thought they should do. How much does something like that impact your decision in who or what you want to make a film about? And what is one lesson you learned from the subjects that you were making a documentary about? I'll start with Lisa.
Well, when I watch the incredible films that my colleagues here have made, I kept thinking about what was that connective tissue. And for me, all of our films are about these outliers, or that are making, and they're shifting the atmosphere, as I like to say. Now, they might not always be seen and known, but through their own sense of conviction and sense of self, they're able to make that impression and be that moment that then puts into action a bigger ramification for others in their personal, in their family space, in their their religious community, and ask us to, as an audience, to think about some of the effects of individuals who we might not see and recognize in our everyday lives, but are actively taking these chances and being bold in their own way. And at the same time, addressing this idea of erasure. Who tells the story, who is centered. And so that I saw kind of as a through line for all of our films.
Lisa, what about you? What's your biggest decision-making process in defining who you want to make a subject?
Do I want to live with them for in my mind and everywhere I turn for 2 to 4 years? There has to be something very compelling about either the subject, like democracy, and with the film I did called All In: The Fight for Democracy, because I felt that film that I did with Liz Garbus, it needed to come out before the elections in 2020 to wake people up about this continuing plan book that has worked to restrict access to the vote. So, there's always a personal stake. And I never do the same kind of film, but I'm always looking for worlds that I haven't seen depicted with the perspective and emotionality that I'm going to bring. And that I think something Dee said earlier that I really tapped into is like, how can I be disruptive in the storytelling? There are music bio doc there's a template. And I was very intentional about saying, okay, Little Richard, you on your own are really exciting, but let's play with magic realism. Let's introduce things that, particularly as a person of color, I've been told, no, you don't make those kind of films. Well, actually, I do make those. I make films. And so it is important through the act of making to be engaged in a way that it excites me, but it also is going to push me to be experimental with sometimes the constraints that exist in the through the mere act of making something.
Amanda, what about you? What influences what you want to make a film about?
Probably people and stories that I know I'm going to be challenged by, probably in an effort to grow and make sense of the world that we live in. And that pretty much always means going into spaces that I don't know much about or don't have a lot of experience with. The evangelical community in this case would be that, or how do I find myself in, I mean, when I hear the story of John Chow going to North Sentinel Island, trying to convert them, I didn't necessarily think I was part of that story initially, but then of course you spend a couple years investigating and find out that what we're telling a story of is a little bit a story about stories, and all the stories you take in as you grow up and how they inform how you understand the world. Mine weren't Bible stories, but they were National Geographic stories. And how did that inform how I understand Indigenous people? It did. And then reckoning with that. And that's part of what I learned in the process of making this film. And that's what you really hope for, honestly, is that you will be surprised in the 2 or more years you spend, and that you will meet people like I met Dan Everett, who kind of change you and surprise you. And that's what's great, is there are still people out there who surprise me and change me. And I hope that keeps happening as I get older and older, and hopefully get to keep making movies.
Laura, what about you? What inspired you to make a film? And could you make a film about a subject that you don't necessarily like or don't respect? I mean, we see documentaries on serial killers, Hitler. I mean, you don't have to make a documentary about something that you don't feel passionate about. How do you feel about that? Do you need to feel passion for what you're making a documentary about, or is it all about finding the story?
Well, I don't need, like, I'm not a free diver, I'm not a passionate free diver, so I didn't have a passion to do free diving, but I had would I make a film about it? There has to be something. It's all about connection. I have to connect with it in some way. It has to kind of like speak to me and like just have something go off my brain to go, wait a minute, I need to know more about this. I need to figure that I don't understand this, or I need to know how this happens. It needs to be like, I need to have 500 questions, for everybody, and it needs to be a puzzle that I need to figure out. I wouldn't want to live with serial killers for 2 years in my house. Not my cup of tea. So there's some things that I say, oh, I'm not interested in that, but there's other things that would be really open to just learning more about. And I suppose another part is that, like, the stakes in life are high, right? Like, no matter what, in your family, in your day-to-day life, the stakes are high, and you don't have to be jumping off a cliff or diving into the sea for the stakes to be high. It could be within a relationship, it could be with an addiction, it could be anything. And I think, like, when human beings are in situations where it's you have to figure out, it's like fight or flight. It's like, what do they do when this happens? And you'll never be able to answer what you'll do until you're in the moment, and you'll do, and then you'll find out what you do. And when people are tested like that, we learn incredible things about ourselves. And as a story, that can be enlightening. And I suppose, going back to something you said a few minutes ago about, like, outliers and people who are kind of going against the grain, I suppose you'd look at, in our case, Stephen and Alessia, they were both outliers, but there was something about Alessia's story of being a 13-year-old girl going to these freediving lessons full of older men in their 30s, and being fantastic, and then being told, actually, you're not allowed to compete because you're too young. and been sent away. And she sat in her room and waited with the attention of somebody who was very alert, waited for 4 years to get back and do it again. And I just thought, that is something. That is something in her that I think is incredible. And where the hell is that going to take her? And it's taken her, like, you know, she's now deepest woman in the world, 123 meters, you know, so it's pieces like that that I connect with. And I'm like, I want to know more about you. I think you're, you know, really, there's something special here.
And Dee, your film was obviously very personal for you. You know, what types of film would you be interested in making in the future? And what did you learn from this being your feature directorial debut? What a debut that was. What would you have told yourself at the beginning, like that you now know?
Wow. Oh my God. This man's good. Y'all hear me? The questions sound simple, but they're really not simple. Like, you know what? Because there's so many things that I've learned in this process, I'm just gonna go with the greatest thing. I had no idea that I needed healing. I just thought I just needed an opportunity to get back on my feet. I didn't know that this process of shooting trans women that has never had a voice, never had the opportunity or the respect to just speak their side of the story. I never thought such a project would trigger me into healing. And I know this is really far off making a film or what I'm supposed to say as a filmmaker. I don't know. But I've lived my life so many years chasing and asking for validation and begging and proving and fucking barely making it, and just so many years. And the very thing that being kicked out of the music industry, the very thing that made me a victim made me a victor. I did everything I could to avoid it. And I ended up telling the stories of my sisters. I've never done sex work, but there was something when they were telling their stories that just made me one with them. I'm not greater, I'm not less. It's just, I'm there. Thank you so much for allowing me to film you, and keep your footage, keep your words, and do what I want to do with them in editing. And you're gonna just sit back and just rely on me, someone you don't even know, for over a year of not hearing back, seeing any footage. That is the animal that you need in filmmaking. And it's not ferocious animals that you need. You need like wildebeest that knows that they have to cross this river every year to risk their life just to move their bloodline forward. They know that there's a chance they might get snapped by an alligator, but one of us got to do it. And so to have that vulnerability and that trust that these women gave me, I realized how powerful of a responsibility it is as a filmmaker. And I just want to become greater and greater in telling stories.
Well, all four of you are powerful filmmakers, and I want to congratulate you for these documentaries. They're all incredible. They're all just getting accolade after accolade. So I want to wish all of you the best of luck in the upcoming award season. Once again, the titles, everyone needs to watch them: The Deepest Breath, Kokomo City, Little Richard, I Am Everything, and The Mission. Thank you all for joining our Gold Derby documentary panel today.
Thank you. It's been wonderful listening to you all.
Congrats, guys.